Coming up on today's show, trapped in a repeating daily nightmare of their own making, Ali Press quit drinking for good in April 2017, drinking away their needs, desires, and wants to be whatever people around them expected had been their go-to for far too long. Quitting meant embracing not being like the others and addressing a lifetime's boundaryless people-pleasing. 7 years on, and through numerous deep dives into their core wounds, Ali has changed how they show up in the world, what they do, and how they date and relate. Ali now supports others through therapeutic coaching to make changes for themselves and build lives they no longer want to numb out. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up, my conversation with Ali Press. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really excited to have what I think is going to be a fascinating conversation with Ali Press. So, Ali, really excited to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Hi, it's really great to finally meet you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation too.
Good. Yeah, it's great to meet you too over there in the UK, bright and early over here in my morning and your lunchtime. So that's really cool. And I've already shared your bio with our listeners, but I'd love it if you'd tell a little bit about yourself in just a couple minutes, if you would, in your own words.
Sure. So I'm a midlife queer person, and I live in London in the UK. The main part of my story today is about quitting drinking. So I've been alcohol-free for 7 years now. Since the 10th of April 2017. And that decision kind of came about as a result of spending the better part of 27 years drinking industrial quantities of alcohol and really having kind of a shit time as a result of it. And all the time I'm trapped in it, all I can hear is clanging discordance in my head that none of this is really working for me. Desperate to change, yet at the same time trapped in this repeating daily torture of my own making. I mean, none of that was fun. It's actually really pretty grueling at times. But I had to make a decision. It was, do I carry on like this? And like my life, like the choices that I had available to me were starting to really narrow, because I kind of figured that if the amount I was drinking wasn't going to kill me, there was the likelihood that I might look at that myself as a way of ending this like torture that I was in, trapped in and completely unable to fight my way out of. So I'd had 2 previous attempts at trying to quit, and I think both of those times I managed 3 months, but then the kind of complacency creeps in, the kind of, oh, you'll be all right. It's not that bad. You've done this long. But, no, that wasn't the thing. And then I was actually sitting in a barber shop in Hackney waiting to have my hair cut. And next to me, just to my left, were this little box of flyers for this group called Queers Without Beers. And I was sitting there side-eyeing them, thinking I want one of those. But I was also absolutely frozen, because if I were to reach for one and pick it up, bearing in mind there were 3 of us in the shop, one was having their hair cut, one was cutting the hair, the other one was me. If I pick that up, somebody's going to see me. They're going to know what a walking disaster I am. So I sat there, and it took a few goes of going to the barber and eyeing up the flyers. And then eventually I grabbed it and I shoved it in my bag. I took it home. And then later that day, I read it. I joined Queers Without Beers. I joined the Club Soda Facebook group, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. And that's where I found out how to do it. I found people who'd been somewhere near where I had, people who could give me the confidence that actually, change was possible for me too. And I didn't have to stay in this hole that I'd made for myself. And it's a little bit like starting my story in the middle, because there's all the things that expend out back ways behind like the 10th of April 2017, and then all of the marvelous things that have happened since then.
Wow.
And how I've reconfigured my life in a way that suits me, and I no longer feel like numbing the shit out of it all of the time.
Wow. Thank you. So, well, first of all, congratulations. Congratulations on that achievement. 7 years, that's a big deal. And I want to honor all the hard work, and also honor your courage and your vulnerability, and just your care for our wider community and anyone who's listening to share your story. So I really appreciate that. And I want to definitely dive more into that. Are you okay if we maybe go back in time a little bit so that I get to know the younger version of you? Is that okay?
Sure.
Awesome. So, and I love that I'd never even heard of Queers Without Beers. That's hilarious and awesome. But I'd love to just go back in time to when you maybe realized, whether it was when you were a youth or a young adult, that maybe you were queer, or maybe that you were going to be coloring outside the lines of gender, or however that looks to you. Can you tell me a little bit about that time of your life?
Yeah, for sure. I always had this kind of sense that I was different, that I was not like the others, but I had no vocabulary to put around that. I didn't know what it meant. I just could see that here's me and there's everybody else, and we were not alike and not really kind of getting along in that way. So I grew up in the 80s, and that's kind of where my awareness of sexuality started to really come into play. Gender identity was a bit later on. But I remember sitting there in like the mid 80s, probably 1984. The AIDS crisis was ripping apart communities across the world, killing people. And on the news in the UK, we had this, there was an advert, I put that in bunny ears, but it had this tombstone, and it was like AIDS kills, and it was all this kind of like panic, but nobody knew what was really going on. And then alongside that come all of the stigmatizing messages about wrongness, and how if this community weren't behaving in such deviant ways, then this wouldn't be happening. It's against God, all of this kind of stuff. And there's little 9-year-old me trying to make sense of this, because I knew disease was bad, because at the same time there was a famine raging in Ethiopia. I knew what that was doing to people. And then I could see this other thing. And at the same time, we had like glorious pop stars like the Pet Shop Boys, like Culture Club. They were there, they were being queer, they were out there. And it was like somehow acceptable in that funny entertainment kind of way, yet absolutely not allowed in the real world, and definitely something that I could consider being. So I guess that was sort of where all it started. And my trying to not be that thing, that was one of the things that took me through adolescence. And it's just not possible. That was one of the things that I realized quite early on. But once sort of like my drinking came along, I found that I was able to squash an awful lot of things out of my life just by numbing. But yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So, yeah, and I grew up in the 80s too, but I was more in high school. So I might be a little bit older than you, but I love that you had that realization. You said when you were about 9 years old, and then I love also that you mentioned that you saw these people like Boy George being out there, but in your everyday life, that was not allowed in bunny ears. I never heard bunny ears. That's cute. we call it air quotes, but I love bunny ears better, actually. And so you discovered drinking maybe when you were like a young adult. Is that right?
Yeah, about 14. I don't think that counts as really being much of an adult.
Yeah, teenager. Me too. It was about 15 for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you discovered drinking, even in high school, that age bracket, teenage years, that's when you're already trying to squash the feelings of being queer and really stepping into that that area of who you are down. You were trying to numb.
Yeah, totally, because that just didn't seem like a possibility for me back in those days. If I think back to my high school years, I was in an all-girls school. In that I still had this clanging I'm not like the others thing, because there I was, this queer neurodivergent kid who really wasn't able to be as social or kind of follow the same sorts of cues as different people. And I felt very much like an outsider, and drinking was one of the things I could do to lower those inhibitions and kind of help with that masking, so I could kind of try and get along like I could see the others doing. But yeah, it was a really difficult and lonely time. And I think even for young queers now, it's, even though like if I look at people around me, I can see that like being queer is much more of an available possibility, but that's very much through a kind of a white middle class kind of lens, where I don't know, in like bunny ears again, what's acceptable has expanded, but also for so many people, it hasn't. So whilst those experiences of mine are specific to that time, I still think it's happening to an awful lot of people now, which then comes out in later life as a huge amount of like self-loathing, lack of confidence, loneliness, crushing loneliness.
Yeah. And I, as you're talking, I mean, there's even, I have a friend in my own life that I've seen recently who I hadn't heard from for a number of years. And that kind of happened. We've known each other ever since we were about 18 or 19. I was 18 or 19 at the time. And I just kind of accepted, I've gone through depression myself, and I've numbed with alcohol myself during that time. So I totally resonate with what you were saying. And I identify more as heteroflexible or queer, but I don't usually use that word, and polyamorous, but still coloring outside of the lines of bunny ears, what's acceptable. So, so when I do have friends that I've known for decades and I don't hear from them for a couple of years, I don't take it personally, because I know that they may be going through something, and this individual is gay. And I did see them recently, and they're not necessarily drinking, but I think there's different ways that we can manifest the pain that's happening inside of us. So so their place was in a bit of disarray, and I took that as, wow, this is like a manifestation of that pain. And so I think, drinking is, it's funny. I mean, if somebody's paying attention, they could see that as a manifestation of the pain. But in a way, I loved how you use the word mask. It's really a way that you're attempting to put a mask on, and also attempting to numb those feelings. Yeah. But I can also say, I think my friend is definitely dealing with depression, self-loathing, loneliness, everything that you were saying, isolating themselves, and that can start to feed on itself. Yeah. And another friend of mine has social anxiety, and she is now sober, but I'm sure that she drank, partly, and she also identifies as queer. And she, I think, was trying to numb that social anxiety and fit in, if you will. Yeah. And she eventually had to, she was brave enough to quit as well. So thank you for everything you're sharing. It really resonates with me. And so when did you start to, now I know you said you were drinking for 27 years. So at some point you must have started to say out loud that this is who I am, I identify as queer. When was that? Was that maybe in your 20s or so?
Yeah. So I came out to other people when I was at university the first time round. I was kind of 18, approaching 19. One of my shortlisting criteria for universities, I was going through all their brochures, and if they mentioned in there somewhere that they had a student LGBTQ plus society, they weren't called that back in those days, they were just LGB, then I'd be like, yeah, that might be one for me. So I chose one on that basis, and when I got there, I was absolutely terrified. Like, how do I don't know how to be this. I don't know what I'm doing. And it took me ages to actually muster up the courage to tell another person that I was queer. So I took a little baby step out of the closet, and I told somebody that I was bisexual. because I figured if that all went south, I could just run back in and go, oh, no, I don't think I am really. It's okay.
That makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
I would have had that thought process. Yeah.
Yeah,
And how did that go when that baby step?
Oh, it was totally fine. Like
Good.
the friend that I told was really accepting, and it was totally fine. But it kind of, I suppose, because I'm not bisexual at all. It was just my sort of like inroad to it. But once I felt that was okay, I thought, well, actually, this is who I am, and it was something that I just really felt that I couldn't deny about myself. I had to just get on with being me, being who I am, coming out. And I guess it's always makes me laugh, actually, because whenever National Coming Out Day comes around, or International Coming Out Day comes around, it's like, well, okay, so there's those times when I came out before, but actually the last time was on Thursday, and this is how I felt about it. But as I started to do it more, I was able to really feel okay in that identity. And I guess most of that was through the 90s, which was still a fairly hostile time for queer people all over the place. Lots of stigma, lots of no acceptance for like colouring outside the lines, as you say. But I couldn't separate out who I was talking about my life. Like, say I went into work on a Monday morning. What did you do over the weekend? I didn't want to be all mysterious about who I did it with or what my home life was like or stuff like that. So I figured that I only had one way to do it, and I just had to power on straight through the middle, which for the most part was fine. But also in lots of other areas, not fine. But it's something that I didn't have the ability to like separate the queer me from the, I don't know, presentable me. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I had to just be that because it's so intrinsic to who I am.
Wow. Yeah. And so through this whole time, even though you mustered up the courage, you took the baby step, and then you just started saying out loud, this is who I am. You were still drinking in different ways to help. Would you describe it as, was there some social anxiety, or tell me a little bit more about what you felt you were numbing, since you mentioned that, which again, I resonated.
Yeah. So numbing, there was definitely social anxiety, because when I finally got to university, I was terrified of other people and wouldn't have said boo to a goose, let alone hello. And drinking for sure helped me out of that. But I was also numbing out a bunch of things that kind of happened in my childhood that were really kind of less than ideal. And also this kind of sense of my difference in the world, which now I know relates to neurodivergence and not just being like the new baby coming on the block. And it was all kinds of different things. It was manifesting in all these weird people-pleasing behaviours, in going along with things, not expecting that good things could come to me just for the sheer fact that I am me and worth it. It was more that someone's offered a thing. I'm like, okay, then yes, I'll go along with that, which is terrible. So I was numbing out all that clanging discordance from that as well, so that I could find a way to live peaceably with who I was, apart from I wasn't, because I wasn't being who I was. I was just like really trying my hardest to squash down the unacceptable kind of less palatable, I don't know, parts of me.
Wow. And I really honor too that you had 2 attempts where you were able to stop for about 3 months. Tell me a little bit more about like when was that in your life, and how did that what was the decision points where you were like, I got to do something, and then there's decision points where then you were like, you know what, but I just want to start drinking again, or however that experience was for you.
So the first one, I was 19, and it had been suggested by other people to me for a while that I had an alcohol problem. And the last thing in the world I wanted was an alcohol problem. So deny, deflect, defenses go up kind of thing. But sitting in bed doing crosswords and cheating from the back whilst drinking whiskey from the bottle just isn't functional. So I had to move away from that, and I did. And then I was still a student at that time, and I got myself a job in the pub just up the road. And I was like, that's okay, I can do this. I'm not going to be consuming any alcohol. I'm there to work. But there's this one guy who kept badgering me. Did I want to drink? Did I want to drink? No, thank you. No, thank you. Then eventually I gave in. And then that was the end of that. The second time I was 30, I think. So I'd lost like probably a good decade of my life after that first
Wow.
trip.
Yeah.
And again, I got to the point where I couldn't keep doing that to myself anymore. It was awful. Waking up feeling like utter shit, desperate for something to change, yet completely unable to do anything about it. So I actually went that time to see my GP, and I said, this is what I'm doing and it's horrible, please help me. And bless him, he did. He was great, and he got me in touch with the counsellor through my GP practice. Things all were going really well. I was sort of trotting along, and I got to about 3 months again, and I started to think, maybe I'm not that bad. Maybe I could have a drink. Maybe I've totally got this now. And it's astonishing how quickly it comes back. It's like your brain remembers at some subconscious level, and I was just going back into like the same kind of processes, and before very long I was back to the awful that I had not long left before, and I lost another decade of my life.
Wow.
It's astonishing how much time and space that can eat. And then I got to my,
Oh, I have a question. So when you say these periods where you lost a decade, were you almost like a functional alcoholic with bunny ears, meaning like you had a job, but you were kind of like foggy through all of it?
Yeah, totally. I had a job. I was doing what might be considered typical things, and sort of on the surface looked like I was managing okay. But if I sort of look back on pictures of me from that time, which there aren't many because we're like going back a bit pre-digital now, even though I looked like I was smiling on the outside, if you looked at my eyes, I looked like a dead person, because there was nothing there. There was no spark. There was no joy. Engaging with things that might bring joy was really super difficult. So yeah, I mean, I had a job. I was doing quite well with stuff, but I still couldn't manage like all of the different aspects of what it was like being me, because I still had these kind of overarching ideas that there was like a lot of not okayness in that.
And were you also dating even at the same time that you were numbing some of that not okayness with how you were presenting to the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. When I did a counselling course a couple of years ago, it's a 3-month one on LGBTQ plus affirmative counselling. We did this timeline exercise, and we had to imagine a roadmap, put ourselves in like a little vehicle, any vehicle of our choice, and then who was in the driving seat throughout all of that time.
Oh, wow.
And I was getting into relationships, really quite long-term ones, where I was just not in the driving seat at all. I was going along with. And it sounds really daft now I look back on it, because somebody showed an interest in me, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you'll do. And that sounds terrible. And when I look back now, I cringe at that. But that's where I was at. So drinking became another way to kind of numb out this not being in relationships that really served me all that well either. And it was only really quitting that I was able to give myself the space that I needed to work out who I actually was when you strip all that stuff away, and start like dating in a way that worked for me.
Wow. Thank you so much. This is so fascinating. And I, again, really applaud your vulnerability and authenticity in sharing all of this, because I'm sure you're going to be helping a lot of people that are listening. And I appreciate that. So I'd love to hear more about what led up to when you did finally. Oh, I did have a question before I get to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were earlier that you were drinking industrial amounts of alcohol. I've never heard that term before. So what would you consider industrial amounts of alcohol?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this, like, it's what I don't want to say is that there is a particular line where up to the line everything's okay, over that line it's too bad, because each person will drink in different ways, and for some people one thing will be okay, for somebody else it won't be okay. But if you were to look at like a standard bottle of normalish strength wine and say that's 10 units, I was getting through between 120, 140 units per week, which is an astonishing amount. Here in the UK, our current governmental guidelines are 14 a week, so 10 times that, which, looking back now, I can't even fathom fitting all of that in. But when you're in it, it's actually really easy, far too easy, because in it goes, and down the spiral you go. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot by anybody's standards, and it takes an awful lot of resilience to keep on doing that to yourself on a daily basis. And it sounds like a really weird way to use the word resilience, because that's something that we usually associate with strength and ability to change and do this or do that. But yeah, it was quite hard work doing, but hard work living. But also, I used to liken it to kind of pulling a great big fat heavy duvet up over my head, because as soon as I had my first drink in the afternoon or early evening, whatever, on goes the duvet, and it's like functioning and interacting with the rest of the world just became more and more of an impossibility.
Okay. And how, and you, our listeners can't, see what you look like, but you're quite thin. You look like you're in shape. So I'd love to know, how was that 27 years of drinking affecting you physically, whether it was your weight or your sleeping or other ways that maybe people might not be thinking about?
Yeah. So weight was one of the biggest things. If I were to look back and look at it in terms of calories, I was consuming an extra 2 days worth of calories per week just through the alcohol that I was consuming, because alcoholic drinks are loaded with sugar. And I think that's one of the things people don't really factor in when they stop, is like when you stop putting that amount of sugar in your body goes, oh my God, what am I going to do without the sugar? Give me something, give me some Haribo, give me some chocolate, kind of thing. So my weight was way over what I wanted it to be. I grew up in quite a weight conscious family, so managing weight and avoiding being overweight was something that was a kind of a big thing. And then you have all the kind of the media representations of how you're supposed to look, how you should look. And I was getting on the scales, it was going up and it was going up, it was going up. And it was a fairly awful kind of thing, because that was, again, a really outward manifestation of what I was doing to myself, along with the kind of like the sweatiness and the feeling like I stank like a brewery every time I left the house, the shame that brings with it as well, because I'd go into work, I'd know I'd had like a really massive night the night before, because all of my nights were like that. And then I just feel like I must be emanating alcohol fumes to everybody around me. But then I sort of figured, once I got to lunchtime, that would be okay, possibly, because I could have been to the pub for a nice lunch with my colleagues and had a drink. And that's the reason why I smell like an old brewery. So none of that happened. None of that happened in real life. I just felt a huge amount of crushing shame because of how I felt on the inside, rather than what my outward presentation might have been like. And yeah, if we sort of like come back to that coming to acceptance around my queerness, I've always been gender non-conforming. I've always worn I don't know, an androgynous kind of presentation, but clothes that just are me. But what I was finding was that even within that range of clothes that were more me, I was not fitting into them anymore, buying bigger trousers, and so on. To the point where like jogging bottoms became my favourite go-to, which weren't really doing an awful lot for my confidence and esteem, but they fitted and they were sort of okay. And then the other thing is like the dead eyes thing that I mentioned earlier. I've got a picture that I took. One was, so it's like a before and after. One was like maybe a few months before I quit for the last time. And one was maybe a year or so, a couple of years after that, because it's just before I ran a marathon. The difference in me, like body-wise, was like from being, I suppose, 103 kilos and the before one to being somewhere under 70 for the after one. So there's that immediate shrinkage. But if you could see me from the front, you would see dead person on this side, no joy, no life, not really a spark in my eyes, to this person on the other side who has got it going on, is switched on, is engaged with the world, is seeing the joy, seeing things out there. Yeah, that's really, like, it's trying to explain it is almost quite difficult because I'm trying to tell you what my insides look like.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, those were the kind of the key things.
You're doing a beautiful job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful job. I'm right there with you. And again, I think all of us, either in our own lives or we know other people who may be struggling with whatever that is, that it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I have so much, empathy, and I'm also so deeply proud of you for getting to the other side of it. And I caught in there that you ran a marathon. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'd love to go back to that question I started to ask earlier, which was what led up to that third time where you finally succeeded? Like, was there a breaking point or like an epiphany that you had, and how did you finally overcome the drinking?
Yeah. So by that point, it was because I'd been through the quitting attempt before. When I see my GP, I did like a home detox. And I knew the dangers of going cold turkey from the amount I was drinking. And like, you don't even have to be at that kind of level to have those symptoms and like the risk of seizures and that kind of thing. So I was terrified about what could happen were I to stop drinking. I was terrified of anybody finding out what I was actually doing to myself, the amount I was drinking and the problems that it was causing. But I also didn't want to carry on living how I was. Like after I joined Quiz Without Beers and I joined the Club Soda group and I started to work out what it was that I needed to do to change, I started making these inroads on quitting. So I would like maybe go a day without drinking, a couple of days, maybe 3 days. But every time I did, I was having these really quite difficult and severe withdrawal symptoms at night. So my heart would be pounding out of my chest, my body, I'd be drenched in sweat. So I was terrified also by what was actually happening to me. But then also on the days when I was still drinking like a pillock, I'd wake up in the night gasping for breath because the sleep apnea was so awful. I'd wake up feeling like had I just nearly died? Was I about to die? What's going on here? Wow. So whichever way I looked at it, I felt like we've got death over here, we've got death over here. What the fuck am I going to do about this?
Wow.
But I had to basically clench my bum cheeks and get on with it because there was no other way. I couldn't like get myself out of the shame spiral without outing myself about what I was doing to myself. And nor could I continue with what I was doing. And then I thought about it. I'm like, actually, no, I really don't want to kill myself. I don't want my life to end here. I want better. And what I could see in this group that I joined was that there were people who had come out the other side, not necessarily from identical positions to where I was, but they changed their lives around. and were living these really awesome lives where they were doing fun stuff. Their lives were interesting. Things were coming together for them. And I was like, well, I want that. How do I get that, please? That's what kind of led into the last time. And I woke up that morning, 10th of April, hungover as hell again. And I thought, this has to be it. If I don't do it now, then when? So I wrote myself this 50-day plan of all of the things that I had coming up, what I was going to do about them, how I was going to navigate them without drinking. I had some friends, they were getting married. I had my own birthday coming up. I had a holiday coming up. So how I was going to manage all of that stuff and stay sober. And I thought 50 days, it's far enough away that it feels like a challenge, but it's also not completely out of reach if I fuck it all up and I have to go back to sort of square one again. And that plan became my lifeline, my mantra, as I was sitting there on my hands some evenings to not pick up a drink, was stick to the plan, stick to the plan. Mm-hmm. And I did. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other and really working hard on what I needed to do to stay kind of on, I say on the straight and narrow, like it's like a narrow pathway. And that's what I had to do. I had to strip away so many different things that kind of could lead me away from that, or were likely to get in the way of what I was doing, or cause me some kind of like mental distresses and so on. And that was how I did it. And then I got to 3 months. I was like, yes, I'm back to the old records. Mm-hmm. And I knew then that I had it. I had the support around me. I had the friends around me that I needed. I had the role models. I was also then being a role model. And I was like, actually, this really speaks to me. I can do this. I am doing this. And yeah.
Wow.
The rest of this is history. Here we are.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're on the Living Without Boundaries podcast telling this inspiring, incredible, amazing story of hope, joy, and rising above challenges and living your most authentic life. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel really happy just being here and talking about it, to hear that reflected back to me.
Yeah.
Because it took everything that I had. I still say now, it was the single most difficult thing I have ever done, and the single most rewarding, because it was like somebody handed me the keys to my life and said, oh, here you go. And then this is how you drive it.
Wow. Yeah.
This is what I want.
Yeah, this is getting me right in the feels. I'm actually getting emotional. I've had my own journey of living my most authentic life, and my mother, she ended up slowly having a drinking problem in her elder years, and she isolated herself. And I think that she had undiagnosed depression possibly, and maybe some other things going on with her. And she was definitely deeply lonely, you know, and she also got herself addicted to Ambien because she couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of, she'd hide the whiskey bottles, she had the Ambien.
Oh, I really feel for her. That is such a difficult place to be, and to feel so lonely and stuck with it, and like you can't find a way out. It's that really hits me.
Yeah, so I appreciate your story, because I've been on my own healing journey, and this past Friday night, a really good friend of mine, we decided that we were going to have like a healing experience together, and we went through that, and through that experience, I felt a lot of healing. My mother's not here anymore, and I felt like I transformed my relationship with my mother, even though she's not here anymore. And my friend has a gift to be able to kind of channel different things, and she was channeling that my mother was really proud of me.
Oh,
the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I feel like talking to you is part of my own healing.
I can really hear that. I can hear your voice like changing as you're talking about it, and that really speaks to me, because that repair, that having that reparative in your life after whatever the awful was, is so important.
Right. Yeah. So just know that, I don't think there's any accident that we're talking here today, and that it happened to be this morning. So, I just want you to know that your story is truly inspiring. I'm sure you're helping a lot of people, and you may even be helping people that aren't here on the planet anymore. Like I really do believe that there's healing that can happen that kind of reverberates and ripples out in ways that we're not really aware of. So, I really am truly deeply proud of that you were able to overcome that. And, and my mother was, I think it was 82 when she passed. And, imagine that, the strength it took for you to quit. Imagine somebody who's 82 and at so tired. It was virtually impossible, and she didn't have the motivation in her life to figure that out, so I really honor you. I'm curious about where in your life was that you were able to do that?
In terms of like
your
figuring
age.
out
Your age.
I was just before my 41st birthday, I think.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Just a few weeks before. And I figured like the next 40 couldn't be like this, because what a shit life lived that would be.
Yeah. And I don't know when my mother started. I mean, she always drank, but I mean, where it started to really become a problem. But I feel like it was maybe in her 50s, So I think it's really powerful that you did that at a point in your life where you had the strength, you were able to figure it out. And also you found that community, because I really do.
Yeah.
Community is everything. So I'm so glad that you were able to find Queers Without Beers. And you were able to find some role models, and now you're a role model. That's got to feel fantastic.
It really does. And it was finding community that was the real game changer for me, because like the way I sort of put it now is like, if you're the only queer in the city and you're surrounded by all these kind of heteronormative people, and you're like, well, I don't fit here. What's this all about? And then one day you find a building where the other queers are hanging out, and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm home. These are my people. This is it. And no, our experiences aren't the same, but there's enough similarities across them. And you think, yeah, this speaks to me. And it's that community, the people who are colouring outside the lines, just like you might have been, in ways that like haven't, like mine kind of informed by all those destructive years of drinking, but finding their way. And yeah, it's so important to find your people.
Yeah, really, that's beautiful. So I'd love to hear more about where you are now. Like, what's your reality now? I know you do psychodynamic counseling. Like, I'd love to hear more about what you were able to make of your life that brought you here to Loving Without Boundaries to have this conversation.
Yeah, so where I am now, I'm a coach. I support people who want to change their drinking. You don't have to quit. You can be like reducing or taking down your binge drinking, or you might want to go completely alcohol free. But one of the things that I bring to that is like a lot of lived experience, which I don't like talk about in sessions mainly, but I kind of know what it takes and what it is that is needed, because something like drinking like that, or whatever substance you're using, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's like a lot of myths around this idea. It's the ultimate hedonism. Oh, all you want to do is get pissed all the time. It's not like that. It's like an internal living hell. So I do that, but I also started 3 years ago training to be a counsellor, talking therapy. And one of the reasons for that is because I want to be able to help others who may have got to a similar sort of a point that I did, where change really needs to happen and you possibly don't even know where to look for that change. And it's part of the reason why I'm here advocating for what I do, for the idea that, yes, you can have been in all of these like awful places, but there's life on the other side. And I know what my history was like. I know what the awful of those years was like. And if I, through what I do, through being open about it, through that vulnerability and honesty, if I can save somebody even an ounce of the pain that I went through, then that's what I want. That's what I want to be able to do. And when it comes to my counselling training, it's this sort of like, no, drinking doesn't exist out there in a vacuum. It's not something that you just do without relation to anything else. It's so often informed by all these other areas of pain in your life. And I think similar to what I did, you had to pull those things out of the box one at a time, put the spotlights on it, look at it this way, that way. What are we going to do about it? And then like neatly file it away in some like boxes over the back. And it's kind of through kicking through all of those boxes and putting things out that sort of like that healing and that transformation comes. And where you can, where I built the life that I wanted, that didn't have this kind of drive to numb it all out anymore.
Wow, so beautiful. Well, that's an incredible, incredible story of hope, of inspiration. Just so deeply proud of you and excited for all the work that you are doing. Before we start to maybe wind up the call, is there any message that you would like to leave our listeners with, or any question that I didn't ask you that you would like to touch on the answer that feels good to you?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, if I look at it through that lens of saving people even an ounce of the pain that I went through, what I would want to say to anybody out there who is questioning where they're at with their drinking or some kind of substance use is to say, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not the only one who's been there, and that there really is a way out of this. It's like life on the other side. It always brings me back to this song by St. Etienne, and it's called Like a Motorway. It's from the 90s. And one of the lines is, life is like a motorway, dull, grey and long. And I thought that's what my life was going to be like without drinking. No fun. I'd be boring. I'd never go out anywhere again. I'd have no friends. But I have to say that nothing could be further from the truth. So if it's something that's in your mind, there are people out there that have been there. Find them, look for the support you need, and live the life you deserve. Don't stay in that trap. You don't have to.
Beautiful message. Thank you for sharing that. So it really, really resonates with me, and also the work that I do, just from a slightly different lens, but not too far from what you're doing. So, so yeah, just thank you so much for reaching out, for taking the time to have this beautiful, amazing, transformative conversation that I hope it will help somebody out there. I mean, think about that.
Yes.
This is going out to the world. There's only, 8 billion people. So I'm sure this conversation, yeah, exactly. So I'm sure somebody's going to resonate with this message when this goes live. So how can people find you, find your work, especially if they are needing help and support?
So the best place to find me is through my website, alipress.uk. And there's a link on there where you can email me, and you can read a bit more about what I do and how I do it. I don't really do too much social media because I don't have the wherewithal to keep up with it for most of the time. So yeah, the website is the best place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure it's going to mean a lot to our listeners as well. And just congratulations, and know that I'm totally in support of your work. If you ever want to come back on the podcast, I'd love to have another conversation. So just really appreciate you.
Thank you. And I was just want to thank you for this morning as well, and for the opportunity to have this chat and to actually be able to put my stuff out there, because it will speak to people. And I know there are people out there feeling trapped and horrible and stuff and need to find their way out. So thank you. It's been really lovely for me, and thank you also for sharing your story. And I'm really touched by what you said about your mum and feeling that sort of sense of repair now, and it being able to go beyond sort of like the pain of the living. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.